Energy today. Thank you. Let's see. Hold on a minute. It's so funky to do this on Zoom. All right, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to the Community Development Commission for October 18th, 2023. And we're starting at 3:32. And I see we definitely have a quorum. I'm a little low energy, y'all, because I just had a procedure, surgical procedure on my mouth. And so if I sound funny, that's why. I'm going to go ahead and get a roll call, Tony.
Yes, ma'am. Chair Villarreal,
Present.
Commissioner Padilla,
Here.
Commissioner Brock,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes,
Here.
Commissioner Torres,
Here.
Commissioner Watkins,
Present.
and Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just so you all know, it's very echoey for us on this side for Zoom to hear you all. So, and there's a slight delay. So if you, I see you all except for Cody. So just make sure if you could raise your hand, and if I miss you, please just say something and try to speak as loudly as you can so the recording can get you as well. All right, so we're moving on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
Any changes from commissioners? Commissioner Kenny Geyer?
So, Madam Chair, I think that I abstained from voting yes on the August minutes since I wasn't there. And I know that you record this meeting, so if I'm wrong, let it stand. But if I did abstain, normally I abstain when I wasn't there. I don't feel like I
Are you talking about the minutes?
So the minutes for September meeting.
We're not there yet. We're just approving the agenda. We're almost there though. We'll fix that. So in terms of the agenda, if there's no other discussion, Tony, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the motion.
Oh, that would help.
First one, I was trying to make one, move approval of the agenda as written. Second.
Did you catch the second as well, Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
As Commissioner
Okay.
Torres. Okay, great.
Thank
Any
you.
other discussion? All right. Can I get a roll call then?
Chair Villarreal,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Motion passes. We'll move on to item 4, approval of the minutes. We first have the minutes to approve from August 23rd, 2023. We are hearing those again because there were some edits. Were there any other adjustments from staff or commissioners? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
Move approval of the minutes of August 23rd. As amended. As amended.
Second. Commissioner Padilla.
Great. We have a motion and second. Tony, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Villarreal,
Yes.
Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the minutes from our September 20th, 2023 meeting. Were there any changes by staff, from staff?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
Any changes from commissioners? Commissioner Kenny Geyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that I abstained from that vote because I don't usually vote yes on minutes when I wasn't at the meeting. If I fail to do that, then you can let these stand, but if you go back and listen to the recording, if I did indeed abstain, I would let that reflected.
Okay, so correction on this one then.
Correct.
Okay, great. Any other changes? Seeing none, what is the wish of the commission?
Move approval of the minutes of September the 20th.
As amended? Okay, and was there a second? Sorry, I didn't hear the second.
Right.
That was Commissioner Brott had the second? Okay, great. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Tony, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair,
Yes.
Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Brott,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins, Commissioner Cunning Geyer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tony. All right, moving on to item 6, we have a presentation. The Office of Affordable Housing seeks comment from actually probably not just the quality of life, right? It says quality of life, but we see comment, the Affordable Housing Office seeks comment from members of the general public concerning the pathways to removing obstacles to housing grant application. And hold on, let me just exit here. And this is an application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or otherwise known as HUD. And I think we have everybody listed staff-wise. So who would like to start?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and kick this one off. We're very excited today to present to you our pathways to removing obstacles to housing, which we're going to refer to as pro housing from here on out. It's our grant application. And I get to present alongside my colleague Florence Frank and our director Alexander Ladd. We're really excited to present this to you. We've been working pretty hard on it the last few weeks and show you our work. First, we're going to provide a brief overview of the funding opportunity, describe what we're requesting, the proposed activities, as well as the potential impact and long-term effects of this funding can have in our community. And then we'll move on to discuss the next steps for the grant application process. The Pro Housing Grant seeks to identify and remove barriers to affordable housing production and preservation through a competitive grant administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. These barriers include, but are not limited to, barriers caused by outdated zoning, land use policies or regulations, inefficient procedures, gaps in available resources for development, deteriorating or inadequate infrastructure, lack of neighborhood amenities, and challenges to preserve existing housing stock, such as increasing threats from natural hazards, redevelopment pressures, or expiration of affordability requirements. As the city is embarking on its own land use code rewrite, our office didn't want to pass up the opportunity to apply for this pretty unique and novel funding opportunity, since it aligns well with the goals of the rewrite and can also be used to realize some of the housing affordability strategies outlined in the Midtown Community Development Plan. If our proposal is awarded, these funds will greatly enhance and support our city's overarching housing goals in these efforts. I know I discussed this last time, but for the benefit of the public, I'll just run through this again real quick. HUD's making $85 million available for this funding opportunity, and they expect to make approximately 20 awards. So this is a very competitive grant competition. The minimum award is going to be $1 million, and the maximum award is up to $10 million. The grant has a 6-year period of performance, and the estimated project start date is January 31st, 2024, or whenever they issue the awards. And the estimated project end date is September 30th, 2029. And we plan to submit this by October 30th, and it is due. There are 5 rating factors. The first 2 are weighted the most. Need is demonstrating an acute demand, and the sub-factors are the production of affordable housing is not keeping pace with demand. There's an insufficient inventory of affordable housing. There's widespread housing cost burden and substandard and overcrowded housing, all of which we can demonstrate in Santa Fe. The next highest rating factor is soundness of approach, where we demonstrate what is our vision, what's the geographic scope of the application, who are the key stakeholders and how are we engaging them, and what is our budget and timeline proposals. Next is capacity. What's our staffing plan and how do we plan to manage the size and scope of this grant? Leverage at 10 points, which is other funding that's committed from outside resources. And then finally, the long-term effects. Can we demonstrate that the funded activities enables the production of affordable housing units long after the grant's period of performance? With that, I'm going to pass it over to Florence.
Thank you, Cody. So Cody really came up with a really good overview of what the grant looks like, and everything in terms of the motivation of why we thought we'd be interested. So for the next couple of slides, I'll kind of walk through what our approach was of actually applying for this grant and thinking on conceptualizing it. I think the most interesting, especially for this group, is what are we actually going to do with funding, and then a little bit of the logic in there. So I'll try to be brief with this first slide because you all were part of that stakeholder group. We wanted to chat with people who actually are involved in these challenges to really identify what these key ones were. So the main process that we did was we went through these mini focus groups. We did a couple with folks who are specifically in affordable housing development, with some city staff, particularly city staff who are in land use planning, and then also with this participatory body. So as you may remember, we prompted discussion with a couple of these questions of what are some of the key barriers. To try to make the data a little bit cleaner, we just focused in this slide here on two different graphs. These were questions that were ranked choice. So the bars that are in blue, those are the ones where people were ranking number one. These are the highest priorities. Orange is number 2, and gray is number 3. So for the one on the left, those were the ones the question was about. What are the biggest barriers related to city processes? As you may remember, we gave you a bunch of options, and we said with this, gut check. This is gut check. This is not looking at data. What are you just thinking are some of the biggest issues? So as you can see with the graph on the left, most of the, in terms of top 3 most important barriers, generally were in the land use zoning category. As you can see towards the top with that example of fees and charges, it's pretty small. It meant that people still thought it might be a barrier, but just a little bit lower down. On the right-hand side, similar question was looking at barriers, but more on the external processes. So things not directly related to the city, but still really important within the field of making new housing production. As you can see here, results were a bit more mixed. There was a little bit more data to show, and it came up in discussion that some local opposition was such a barrier. So as I granted, most exciting part, what are we doing? What is our soundness of approach? So in terms of the money, it's really split into 3 different distinct categories. The first is the funding the rest of the land use code in that rewrite. So where we're at right now, in terms of the city, they're working through that first stage, which is coming up with that framework. We'll be wrapping in the next couple of months or year. What we're proposing to do in our proposal, it's phases 2 and 3. 2 is filling in the meat of that proposal. What are the processes? What are the policies? And 3 is implementation. We thought it was really key to be funding both of those so that we weren't just coming up with theoreticals. The second, and this is definitely the bulk of our proposal, is looking at pre-development. So that's parcelization, survey design, all infrastructure, and that would be for 1 or 2 key parcels within Midtown, and that's going to support the construction of 45. So again, this is the bulk of our proposal. This is not directly creating housing, but all the work that needs to be done to get the site shovel ready. And then the last, which is a really interesting and a newer concept for us, but we were thinking of a neighborhood stabilization process. So the idea of thinking of, we want some balance. We know Midtown is going to do a lot of great work for the city. It's a huge amount of investment, but we don't want to keep having displacement issues that we keep seeing. So we really thought of this as a balancing act. So this is a theoretical map. I'll try to walk you through it, but just getting back to what I was saying originally of, we wanted to present to you today what our main proposal items were, and then the logic behind it. So as you can see, those little circles, those are the 3 different funding buckets that we talked about. That's land use code rewrite, the pre-development work in Midtown, and then also starting that neighborhood stabilization process. Those diamonds, those are the big goals we're looking at. The 2 main areas we're really looking in terms of objectives is increasing affordable housing supply and decreasing displacement from Santa Fe. So kind of starting from the top and working around to the left, as you can see, the way we see this is that if we can change the land use code, that should increase the amount of not just affordable housing supply, but just any market rate housing supply. Through inclusionary zoning, which is already an existing policy here within Santa Fe, that's going to be one of the many channels in which that will be increasing affordable housing supply. On the pre-development side, on the Midtown parcel, as mentioned, this is not for the actual construction of new homes, but all the pre-development work to get it shovel ready that gets towards the same goal, which is having increased affordable housing supply. Those parcels we're looking at, we're going to be doing an RFP structure for that affordable housing development. It's going to be looking at 100% affordable housing. And in that, we would like to have some incentives to develop a community land trust. To try to get that going. So that in combination with that neighborhood stabilization process, we're hoping those together go towards that shared goal of decreasing displacement that we have. Again, it's a long proposal. We didn't want to go through all the steps. I mostly wanted to share some of the highlights from that soundness of approach to explain how we got there. But we have a lot of data in terms of the different rates and different things that are going on. Alex, do you mind jumping in for the last couple?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I think the last few slides, the application format, as you all may have noticed, there were several bolded headers. What we did, the application itself had question prompts for each of these sections. And so we were trying to make it easier to read. So we were sort of creating headers out of those questions. But that's really where kind of some of the most, I think, interesting thought process went into how do we answer the questions that HUD's asking that are really about impact. And I have to say, in all of my years of working with HUD, it's always so refreshing when HUD comes up with something like this kind of grant, because it is really, really progressive and really, I think it's really innovative. And we got, as a team, we were really inspired by trying to really spend some time thinking about, like, how do we know that we've moved the needle? How do we know that we have accomplished something using these funds? And that's why we really wanted to think bigger than just helping fund the code rewrite and maybe just doing the pre-development work for a development parcel, but really look at how do we make that process iterative so that we're kind of doing everything in real time. So as we're offsetting impacts to surrounding neighborhoods, we're creating momentum to start the development, and we're also informing the land use code rewrite, like what's going to work better if it's written in a certain way. And then it also kind of, all of those processes feed each other going the other way too. So this slide is I'm not going to read through it. I think you all have seen it and looked at it, but these are kind of what we saw as the things we could point to that would actually move the needle and make an impact. And we can talk more about this after the presentation if you all want. But I think just a couple of things to pull out. I think HUD is very, very focused on, and a lot of HUD language is really designed for a high density urban environment. So sometimes some of the conceptions of what a low opportunity neighborhood means versus a high opportunity neighborhood don't really work in Santa Fe, because we're just smaller and we have a lot less density of population. And so you can live in a quote unquote low opportunity neighborhood, but you might be across the street from a high opportunity neighborhood. So we were trying to kind of look at Midtown's going to become, if all goes well, that high opportunity area. So kind of try to achieve two things at once, which is expand housing opportunities for the residents in a low opportunity area that both include the housing in a high opportunity area, but also include making their current housing situations better and higher quality and more stable. So it's, I'm probably spending too much time on this slide. Anyway, so let's go to the next one and then we can talk more in detail about that. So the grant application asks for pretty specific deliverables, measurements of success and long-term impact, long-term effects. And so I was looking specifically at, in our development pipeline, how many units do we have, how many housing units do we have that are in some process of approval. And we could, at the end of this, if we got 600 of those homes actually to the permitting stage or under construction, they're in the process now. I felt like that was a really great measurable, deliverable for us, a good thing to measure. We've got lots of data that looks at how the percentage of populations in different districts and census tracts have changed. So I thought we could measure kind of, are we able to stabilize that change, which is, of course, as all of you know, skewing toward the older, richer white people live in one part of town and everybody else lives in the other parts of town. So we can kind of look at, is there a way that process is evened out a little bit? We also looked at, I think one of the interesting ways in the more developed parts of town, we hear this a lot, like all the new development goes in District 3 or District 4, which really is more a function of it's, there's just more developable land. It's flatter, tends to be flatter. It's better served with more up-to-date infrastructure. And it just kind of makes sense that from a development perspective, that's where new development's going to go. So I was really interested in this idea of how do we sort of look at development goals in the older parts of town, and that's really going to be through incremental infill or ADUs, and some of these pathways to creating more housing opportunities are definitely going to be addressed in the code rewrite. Some of the opportunities already are in the code, but we just have to figure out how to unlock the opportunity because people aren't really doing it. So that was another thing I thought would be interesting to measure is, do we see more ADU building permits over time? I think the other very tragic new demographic shift that we've seen is we think that we've lost lower income renters and they've been replaced by higher income renters. So that's another thing we can measure. And then just in general, you know, we're hoping we can lower cost burdens for people, and that's a two-way street. It's also increasing incomes, as well as making more affordable housing available. And there's one more slide, right? Yes. So I'll just end on next steps. HUD was very clear about wanting there to be public input and response even before the application was drafted. So that's why we started with those focus groups, because we wanted to make sure, and I think the idea is that they want to make sure that nobody's going down a pathway that's sort of a niche pathway that anyone else in the industry or anyone else in the community thinks is a bad idea. So because the more sort of general buy-in there is, the more success, more opportunities for success, the greater the odds of success are. So so that was the first step, which you all were part of, and you know about that part. And then we drafted the application. So right now we're in the middle of the public comment period. It's available on our website. The city's pushed it out in promoted it in a few different ways. And that's open until October 24th. As we do today's meetings and get responses from the public, we'll be compiling those responses and comments and incorporating the ones that work into the application, but everyone's comment will be noted. It will be part of the application packet. And then we'll continue, because this is just the start of public engagement. If we get these funds, you know, we're going to need to have the public and the beneficiaries and the partners are all going to need to be part of this on an ongoing basis. So we will be talking very often with the public and making sure that the community is in the driver's seat when it comes to defining these opportunities. You know, we want that to be the defining success, is whether we're actually doing what the community needs, right? And then at the other point to make, of course, is that this is not an approval. We're not requesting approval. We're just requesting comments today. And from the Quality of Life Committee, because we needed to have a governing body committee where the public could attend and comment, but we're not requesting approval because the governing body ultimately will approve the uses of funds. So if we do get the funding, then we'll start to procure the services, find the partners, figure out where the opportunities are. And at that point in time, the governing body will make the final approvals, both through the budgeting process, but also through the contracting process. So I just want to make sure that everyone's very clear that this is not the first time that anyone's going to get, or in the last time anyone will get to comment on this or make any kind of decision. It'll come back over and over again. All right, I think that's our last slide.
Thank you, team. I just want to note that this, the document, I read through most of it and it's very thorough. There was a lot of great data that we've had from various sources that are all pulled into one document. So I thought it was very helpful to have all that in one place from the various requirements that we have through HUD and then other reports that we've done. So at this point, I have some just minor questions, but I wanted to ask or open it up to the commission to see if you have any questions or comments based on not just the slide deck that we just saw, but the entire report or the proposal, excuse me. So why don't we open it up to the commission? I see Commissioner, let's see, who do we have here? Hughes.
Sorry, I have a computer, I could hit my raise hand function, but I'll do the old fashioned. On the penultimate slide, you had different measurements.
Yep.
One of them was quantified, the rest weren't. I hope you'll be able to go in and put in 30% more accessory dwelling units, or something like that, so that I would imagine HUD would want to know that. Maybe you already do, it's a summary, but. And then the one that's not on there is a measurement of the land use code update. You have a significant part of the proposal. You obviously want to have some kind to reflect quantitatively update of that code to help meet these other goals.
I don't know if I didn't hear everything. I wonder if Alex did or Cody. I don't know if you want to respond to that. We didn't hear everything. It sounded like Alex heard part of it too.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Hughes, I think that's a great point about the building permits, and I'm just gonna fess up here. That was one of those numbers I wanted to look up before we put everything together, but we'll make sure that it's in the final draft, because I think we know it's a limited strategy, but it is important, I think, to your point, that we figure out, well, what's reasonable in terms of quantifying it. So we'll do that. And that's a really, really good point about the code rewrite. I think, and this is what happens. This is why public comment's so helpful, right? Because when you're in it neck deep, you tend to overlook obvious things, which is, well, of course it's obvious when the code rewrite's done, but we should probably articulate that a little bit more clearly. So I really appreciate that. We will add, minor language that looks at, and I think one of the benchmarks for that accomplishment, which is very clearly articulated, is the proposal from Clarion, which looks at all sorts of, and we were going to include that as an attachment because it does break it out by activity and proposed completion date and all of that, and the roles for them versus city staff. So but it's a good point, because of course most people haven't seen that, and so why would you necessarily think that was in there? But we'll make sure we reference it a little bit clearer.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute here. There we go. Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several different questions, so I'll just start with one and piggyback on Commissioner Hughes on the code rewrite. And then I'd love to, after the people have a chance to ask questions, love to come back to some of the other ones I have, if they haven't been asked. But first of all, thank you to the team. It's unbelievable what you've pulled together since we met a month ago. Like, wow, huge kudos. But my question on the 500,000, I think it was, for the code rewrite, is the code rewrite is happening now. Is this additional funding to speed it up because it would have taken a couple of years? You know, what is the justification? Because of course we can always shift some of those dollars to something else if there's not a really strong reason to put resources into the code rewrite. So I know what's happening now, and I just want to understand why this additional infusion, what will this additional infusion of money do for that?
That money is money that hasn't been identified for the second and third phase of the code rewrite, so it's kind of gap financing, so they would have to go to the city council and request more funding for that process.
And that exact amount is from exactly what Director Ladd was talking about in terms of the Clarion has the scope of work. They're very clear, like, we will do this, you will do this, these are the approximate dates. And something that came up with this discussion, I figured, yeah, this group might be interested in hearing, most of that 500,000 is really for community engagement and making sure that they're being able to come here for the public meetings, do it in the right way. I thought that, at least personally, thought it was really interesting within their scope of work. They were able to explain, like, this would need to be achieved, like, for phase 2, for instance. This will need to be achieved in this many public meetings, and that's why.
Commissioner Kenny Geyer, also, we were thinking that if we were able to kind of weave together that regulatory and policy work with the actual development and the neighborhood stabilization process, that we would get a bigger impact at the end of the day.
Were there other questions, Commissioner, that you wanted to ask, or there's some?
And let other people ask questions, and then I'll add whatever hasn't been asked at the end.
You know, I'll piggyback on your question if I may.
Sure, Commissioner Brock.
So, I mean, from my experience in grant writing, generally speaking, a grant is a low probability event of us winning it. So whole nation applying for this, cities across the country. So what is our plan B here? These all seem like things that need to happen. Shouldn't just, like, we don't just want them to happen, they kind of need to happen. A land use code rewrite is essential to the city. What is our plan B to find that funding and kind of get it in front of the decision makers to make sure that it happens either way?
So, Commissioner Brott, in the application, we had to tell them, they asked specifically, what's the least amount of money you can get in order to achieve your desired impact or your desired outcome, and what could you do with half the money? So we did think through this a little bit. The first thing that we would ditch would be the code rewrite, because we do feel like it at some point in time, somebody's going to find budget for it. Like I said, we wanted to be able to make it more meaningful, especially in terms of affordable housing. And that's why we were sort of excited to like weave it into our application. And also it's if the funding's out there and we can use it for this, like, that's great. But I think that we would prioritize, certainly the next priority is to jumpstart development in Midtown, and specifically that first affordable piece where we are also hoping to pilot either an innovative ownership model or some kind of very affordable homeownership option for folks who have an opportunity to live at, or want to have an opportunity to live in Midtown. So, you know, that piece is, well, I guess my point is Plan B just will take longer. You know, we will eventually have funding to start the infrastructure work in Midtown. But right now, this is a way to really catalyze it. So we're really hoping that it works out.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Let's see. And Commissioner Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, thank you for that question, because we always ask that question to our applicants when they come before us requesting money. If we can't give you the, $500,000 that you're asking for, what do you need? What are you going to do next? Do you need half of it? Thank you for that question. Sometimes we don't remember to ask those questions of ourselves. Alex, in reference to initiating affordable housing development in Midtown, 45 affordable units. Is that what is proposed? Is that what we're saying we want to impact? Why only 45? And are those single family units? Are they multifamily units? What are we proposing in that line item?
Commissioner P, yeah, thank you for that question. That is directly related to the work from that went into the master plan and looking at what is the carrying capacity of the land itself and what does that look like in terms of economics, and we were very committed because of the work in the community development plan where the community said loud and clear, we are ready for some really affordable housing there. We want to try some innovative community controlled ownership models. So that's why we thought that when we were going through the planning process, why we thought that very first parcel, it's also served by infrastructure, so it could be developed. It's right by the existing access point. It has a sewer line that eventually will be replaced and made a lot more practical for the rest of the development, but it's there now. So that was the other reason, is to try to make sure that we were jump starting or catalyzing development there with the most affordable project. And so the 45 units, I think if I didn't answer that clearly, is from the master plan.
Master plan, thank you.
And it would be kind of more of a higher density, like more of a townhome model versus not, I don't think there's going to be any standalone single family at Midtown. It's just too small of a space, and we want more opportunities than that.
Commissioner Padilla, do you have other further questions? I didn't see what he said, but I didn't hear that. Is that a no?
That was a no.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions from other commissioners?
Terry, I have more. I'd love to
Sure.
hear yours first.
Yeah, we can go to mine. Mine is, well, first, Alex, let me just clarify this. So the report is due on October 30th. So what's still left to complete? So what we saw was the completed final draft. And what do you foresee as still needing to add, other than potential comments that you receive from now until the due date?
Madam Chair, really, we're just down to the little details. So we want to get a couple of support letters, or actually commitment letters, because the foundations have expressed interest in helping with the capacity building piece. We've got to double check some of our budget numbers just to make sure that we're being realistic. As always, we've got them in there. We just want to make sure all the documentation lines up. And we have all the HUD forms we have to fill out. So just like with CDBG, we have to fill out a budget form, and it's a grant application form that's just one of those kinds of things. And so we're in the process of preparing all of those. But really the narrative, I mean, I would say is 95% there. We may have to trim it down just a tad because there are some space limitations, but we're pretty close. So we don't expect that anything's going to change dramatically.
Great. And then the process after submittal, is there a time frame they give you as to, or is there like another step that you have to say you make it into the finalist group or something? Is there anything, did they give you some kind of time frame?
Madam Chair, I believe, and Cody or Florence should jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I think they had a plan to have the notification letters go out in January. Processing that grant agreement, the resulting grant agreement, is probably 2 or 3 months, and all of this assumes that the government doesn't shut down. So it's HUD time. You know, the very soonest I think we may be able to start budgeting for some of, if we do get a notification in January, we could probably start putting some of it into our budget for next year, but we certainly wouldn't begin any expenditures until next fiscal year.
But you think
That's all exactly correct. I think the only thing to note is in terms of like potential delays, I know they very much emphasized the environmental review would need to be completed before they give us money. But it's not, it's an excellent question, Madam Chair. There's not like a finalist round and like a second. It seems like they're gonna decide who their winners are. And in terms of the math, in terms of the general bucket, we think besides the fact that we have a good application, we are pretty on target for what they're looking at. Like if they were to give every winning group about the same amount of money, it's about this 4 million amount. I think the trickiness will be if some groups are applying for 10. And if those score higher. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we, in the application, I noticed just kind of the three kind of tiers of what we are applying for. We didn't mention, we talked about the land use code and policies and regulatory aspects, and do we need to reference it specifically to housing? Because it didn't say housing in that description until you like further down where it gives a more robust description or how it relates back to affordable housing or housing in general. So I'm just curious if we have to explicitly, or should we state that at the beginning? I think it's on page 3 that we state that.
Madam Chair, I think that's a great point. And again, when you're buried in it, everything seems really obvious. So let's do that. We'll make a note to just be very explicit about that. You know, I think it's the land, and all of you probably were part of or paid attention to the presentation of that assessment. And that certainly came very clear through what the consultant was saying was, you know, there's low-hanging fruit here, right? We can take care of some of the inconsistencies and confusion in the code, which by itself is going to help loosen up some development activity. So, but I think that's a good point. We'll just be super specific there.
Only because the code, there's so many pieces to it that need updating that they'll be tackling. And there's, you know, a lot of it does actually affect housing, but I'm just wondering if being more explicit that it was specific to the changes that are happening that we'll be honing in on the housing rules and regs. Something to that effect.
I think we can do that easily.
And then same page on page 3, we're talking about the developing, it's on the second paragraph in the executive summary, some of the challenges, and we said to like topography, emerging workforce populations. Nowhere do we say anything about just the fact that we live in a semi-arid climate and there's limited water resources. Do we need to say that explicitly? Because we have a very different ecosystem compared to like another place that has plentiful water resources. And I guess I'm just trying to frame it differently. Do we need to frame it differently because we live in the semi-arid climate? And that changes a lot of things or affects things.
Madam Chair, I might ask, Florence wrote something very compelling about our water management practices, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what your climate is. I mean, it does, but it's more about how you manage your water supplies. Humid place, a lot of those places don't do a good job of managing water because it's everywhere and they don't think they need to worry about it. And Santa Fe really is a national leader in both conservation, but also just thinking ahead and being really smart about balancing water use between different diverse water supplies. Florence, do you have anything to add to that? I know you put in.
Thank you for giving us that information. So, Madam Chair, you bring up a really great point, but to back up to what Director Ladd had said, this application, I mean, just the questions alone, I think it was 10 pages, like 8 or 10 pages. It was a lot of questions, yeah, that we were getting through. So much of this when we were writing it was not just coming up with what are the right barriers? What is the right solution for Santa Fe? But just, are we answering the right questions? The reason I bring that up is there is a section much further down. It's in that long-term effects towards the end of the application. And it's exactly what Director Ladd was talking about, of they ask about, you know, what are some of your environmental concerns? exactly as you brought up, every area is gonna be different. So one of the ways we approached it was saying like, yeah, water is an issue, and this is how we're approaching it and approaching it well. I think part of my concern with bringing it up too early on is we also do mention in our needs section that water is often brought up when people attend some of these meetings to say, oh, why we shouldn't be building housing is this, I called it misinformation. It's not like water isn't a problem. It absolutely is, but just how you go about building. With that being said, and especially as I said that out loud, I do think it's a really good suggestion. I think given how long it is and how I assume a lot of people are going to be reading it in different capacities, it's worth bringing up some detail earlier. But I do want to mention that tension of, I don't want to make it seem like we cannot build housing here because of the water problems too early, because it's just not true. Not true. We do a really good job.
Yeah, I think we did a good job, or you all did a good job explaining kind of the water conservation aspects. I was just thinking, not just water availability, we do have a different way to build because of our semi-arid climate compared to other places. But I understand like that was at the beginning, so I don't think we need to explain that. And I was just more questioning, like, should we add it? Maybe it doesn't make sense there because we do have that other section that's pretty thorough. The other thing and I'll switch to my colleagues here. Do we need to state anywhere about the excise tax initiative in here?
Madam Chair, we talked about that and we decided, no, we want them to think we're desperate for their money and give it to us. No, I'm kidding a little bit, but we also sort of, that felt like it was taking it maybe once. If we knew that the vote had happened, we could sort of be strategic about it, but we didn't want to be sort of projecting out there like, oh, well, maybe this will happen and maybe this will be available and maybe not, who knows, that just felt a little too, it felt a little too squishy.
Okay.
As somebody wrote that paragraph, like I'll make fun of it if it wasn't flowing well. And as we've mentioned before, we're really kind of up against the age limit right now. Like I've already started a round of edits. There definitely is some room to cut, but anything that we can be strategic about, it's tricky because on the one hand, we are being really innovative. And that's why I initially wanted to include it.
Okay. I had a feeling that was kind of the case, but just wanted to ask because I think Commissioner Torres might have asked that the last time. Yeah. So, all right. So I will pause and switch back to folks, Commissioner Torres, and then we'll go to Commissioner Kenny Geyer. And then I think Commissioner Brott had some more questions or comments.
So I'm wondering if in the narrative, there's any explanation as to the people most affected over lack of affordable housing versus the housing that has been built is meeting the needs of higher income at this point. Is there an explanation about that? And perhaps it's important to really emphasize that building is happening in Santa Fe, but it's not really meeting the needs of the people that work, for instance, in the tourist industry. It's meeting the needs of other industries impacting Santa Fe. And maybe that's important because that's who all of this is for.
Commissioner Torres, I think that's, as always, a really fundamental point. And we have lots of data that shows what that mismatch is between incomes and housing prices. And we do certainly talk about that a lot in the needs section. I think that's one of the, I think from the HUD perspective, that's one of the things that makes this application appealing, because we also know that in our market, because of some of those baked in barriers to housing production, any housing production that are in the code and in the current land use process, that we know that value is maximized here because developers are trying to cover their bases and they don't know how long it's going to take to get through the system. They don't know if all the neighbors are going to show up and file an appeal to it's so they sort of start off. Plus we have all these other factors like labor's hard and materials are more expensive and you have to import everything and there's lots of factors. But when you look at another community that might have some of similar factors, it's still much less expensive to develop there. So we're just at the very ground level, we're starting at a place where developers have to maximize value. And that's not healthy for the market either, right? Because they can't build for any variation of incomes because they have to shoot for the highest number. And that's kind of why I think that this is such a great opportunity for the city if we can really look at how some of those barriers could be removed in code, which would then relax some of that pressure to maximize value for a market rate, because that will we do a good job of subsidizing the subsidized stuff, but we need that moderate market rate as well. So that's why I'm hoping that HUD looks at this and says, oh my gosh, what a great use of our money.
Another question. Have you received comments from some of the community groups representing the lower income, high need people in the community? Like Somos, Chainbreaker, Earth Care, have any of their constituents been engaged in this process?
I'd say the comment period's been open for about a week. We haven't had any comments yet, like representing a whole group. We have had members. I don't want to point too much to people and point them out, but I would say a lot of it felt like it was fair housing, and the general sense was like, these are absolutely barriers I face, and I really do need help within this area. I hope that helps to answer part.
And we've done like a general outreach, but it probably would be helpful to be more targeted with it, so we can just send the report or our grant application to groups like Chainbreaker.
It's only a week left before the 24th, roughly, not even a week.
Commissioner Torres, I think also, since this is still so theoretical, we don't know if we're going to get the funding. Like, we know, and we're very committed to, if the funding does come through, that's going to be a much different conversation to have with folks, because we can really figure out what those desired outcomes are and how we can meet them. So that's something, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's going to be really, really critical. At this point, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall a little bit to see what sticks and just hoping something does. To the extent that we can incorporate, we have to incorporate all comments. HUD requires that, or to note them at some way. So I think with a week left, though, we could probably, Cody and Florence, I'm gonna have you guys work some of your young person innovative creativity, and just maybe we can do like a little blast out that is more targeted.
I will say that I guess I would not agree with Alex saying we're throwing stuff to see if it will stick on the wall, because all of this stuff has been talked about and been discussed even with community groups like Chainbreaker, but we haven't been able to figure out funding sources. And one in particular is like looking at anti-displacement models or initiatives. There's no funding source for that, and this would be one of them. And that's something that we've been trying to work with Chainbreaker and trying to figure out what that looks like. Obviously, the details of that would be figured out with community groups, but I think the way we're stating it is a little bit more general, high level. And then the other piece is a community land trust. That's been something that I think a lot of community groups have been on. That's been a wish list for a while. And the fact that it's even being discussed and asking for funding potentially to initiate that is a big plus in my mind. So I think all of these things are things that like community grassroots groups have been talking about for a while, and it's always been challenging for us to try to figure out funding sources to make that happen. So that's why I feel like it's kind of covering some of the stuff, even language in there. I don't know if it was taken from Chainbreaker, a Chainbreaker report, but I feel like there was something that was discussing around anti-displacement and Hopewell Man, but I'm not sure. Maybe Alex, you can elaborate on that.
Madam Chair, thank you for pointing that out, because I think when I was using the spaghetti metaphor, I'm thinking like, what's gonna stick on HUD? I know all this stuff is gonna work and is the right thing to fund, but like, what is HUD gonna think so? Let's see what happens. But that is a really good point, and I'm glad you also reminded me that Commissioner Torres, a lot of the language is from the community development report, the plan that the community was really, really involved with. So that was another reason why we sort of felt like we had this beautiful built-in community designed application, because we were able to just extract a lot of those priorities from the plan as well. But before we use the funds, we really need to continue to have the conversation with everybody.
Commissioner Torres, did you have any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, we could come back if you have questions. Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that was one of the questions I was gonna ask, and I'm newer to this community. I don't know as many of the groups. Certainly those are ones I've heard of. But I wondered if you need our help in sending you contacts for groups. You know, I think about the LGBTQ community and the trans and the other ones that I've heard testify on housing bills that are based here. And so I would hope that we get as much feedback, but also support letters from some of those groups specific to this proposal. So I think the fact that you can say, these are the groups that we engaged in the community development plan and the principles is great. But the more that we can say they've actually weighed in on this proposal and support this proposal. So I just, if you would like everyone here to reach out to groups that they're involved with, I'm assuming that might be a good idea.
Yeah, love that.
Definitely.
Okay, so that was one of my questions. Another, I have like big stuff and little stuff. I mean, little is on the charts. There's a similar chart on page 9 and page 35, and they use 2010 demographic. And so I'm wondering if that can be updated, but I'm also wondering why it shows up in 2 different places. Maybe this is just part of your editing, or maybe because you need to refer to it in that narrative that's associated.
Yeah, if it's the map I'm thinking of, it's one of their maps. It's one of the maps they really like, and I think I had the same reaction of like rolling my eyes at 2010 when we have so much better data, especially for Santa Fe.
Yeah.
I think with it coming up twice, I think that's more of an editing,
Okay.
but it's a good reminder.
Okay.
Those-
So I would
those
hope
take
that we would
space.
be able to get more recent.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't come from HUD, if they don't have a 2020, maybe something local, but that really stood out to me. And then you, in the very beginning of this presentation, showed charts, and I don't see it in here. So if you were to incorporate those charts, the two, the external, I would just suggest that you put the ones that ranked the highest above, like, it just is easier to read that way, and yeah. That was just another, these are just really small comments. Back to the question of the first $500,000 in code and policy and administration. Does that also include increasing capacity in the city office for permits? Because I've heard this from Commissioner Brott about permitting taking so long. I've heard it from other people too. So is there room for that? And also I don't know how we do our system development charges or sewer, all those kind of things. Is it included in this proposal? Because that's one of the things that stops so much development is when housing developers have to pay into, at least in Oregon, pay into sewers, parks, schools, etc. And so I just don't know how it works here, or whether this is addressing something that I sometimes hear is a barrier that drives up the cost. So maybe you can ask that more eloquently than me, or maybe you already know the answer.
No, that's a good question.
I think to the first part of your question, in terms of the permitting and whatnot, I think a very clear thing, and it definitely came up when we had a focus group of people from the land use office. They made it very clear in this application that this cannot be used for government functions. Like, this is very much, they gave us a menu of things that can come up, mostly policy and planning. So my roundabout answer to that is, I think that would be a helpful avenue and helpful path forward in terms of let's guide our policies and our processes to make it more efficient, to make it faster. But trust me, they would love it too. We can't just like add more staff. But we can't, but that could be one of the guides within it. So I think that could be an area of, just slight clarifying words, because it definitely did come up in statements. Exactly that. Alex, did you want to jump in on anything else in that question? That was the main one.
Yeah, one of the things we already do is we waive a lot of the capital impact fees for affordable housing development. And that is one of the things that the link overlay tries to do, is to reduce and provide incentives for what is more sort of performance-based development rather than just strictly following a zoning code or a zoning district requirements or the building code.
Okay.
Commissioner, do you want to keep going?
Well, so one of my other questions was if the tax does pass, how much of this could it fund? It would be more around that $2.5 million chunk, but we're not allowed to do the code rewrite and other things out of the tax. Could the tax pay for any of these things?
The trust fund could be used to help with the infrastructure build out at the parcels at Midtown, but generally how
That's the $2.5 million.
yes. And then I'm not sure, definitely not the land use code rewrite. However, we do it on a request for application cycle, so it would have to be a third party. So if we, there's a developer who responded to the request for proposal for the site, and they could apply for affordable housing trust funds to subsidize the development in whatever ways they need.
And then just my last thing was the Green Chamber of Commerce. That would be one of the names that I would encourage you to send directly, because they do try to do so much with water saving and electricity and things like that, and really having this, trying to do this in a sustainable way to address the water and the semi-arid, would be good to show that we have partnership with them. That's it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Brott.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple more questions and comments. Just overall, I just want to say what a good piece of work, really well researched, really formatted, clear, concise. You guys represent our city well, so thank you. One section for me stood out as just perhaps needing a little bit more attention, and it's the implementing a strategy for neighborhood stabilization. I read it and reread it, and I just felt like it was just pleasant. I felt like it was, I wrote in the margin 10 times how, when, how. And so to me, it left open a number of questions of, how we're going to do things in that type of granularity that can kind of anchor people's minds, that we've thought through the A to B to C linkages, that I just think would strengthen this as a proposal, as something that HUD would find working. For me, just accompanying the process around Midtown for so many years, I probably have received and responded to 20 surveys, maybe more. I just delete them generally now when they come into my inbox. We want more feedback. We're looking for community engagement. And I found that language throughout here, kind of dotted throughout grassroots community engagement, technical assistance, asking for supporting, measures for the community. Those are fantastic ideas. I want to see that happen. I think everyone does. But I think it's also important saying we have been doing this for years. The city has done a commendable job in reaching out to the community around the Midtown area. This is what we found. This is what we know we need to do. And this is how we're going to do it. The missing bridge is the money. And I think that, to me, if I was working at HUD, would be more compelling than kind of what for me felt jargony of engagement, surveys, reaching out. I mean, it felt a little bit like that to me. So I hope that's all. Yeah.
You want us to address that or talk about that? Have staff talk a little bit more about that? Those two questions. Commissioner Brott, do you want us to respond to that, or do you want to keep asking some of the other questions you had?
I'd be happy if you responded to that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first, I actually agree with that, the community-led process. Maybe we can just explain how we shifted gears for Midtown and the community-led process led to a lot better outcomes when we worked with community-based groups that took the lead on that process. So maybe there's a way we've talked about it, and I think we even talked about it in the Midtown plan. But I do think there's something to be said that we learned that the first iteration of that wasn't the best way, and then we took another approach, and we want to continue to use that strategy as we move forward. So maybe it's something to that effect in explaining what we've done that's shifted and that's actually been more beneficial, and that more people were included in the process and more diverse voices and feedback. So I don't know, Alex, do you have, or Cody, do you all have any insight on that?
Well, I think what I'd like to do is look back exactly at that language, because again, it may have seemed obvious to me, because the big change and the big difference is when the groups who are going to be either benefiting from or suffering the impacts from development, when they're leading the conversation, that's when we know we're going to get to the outcome that we want, versus this sort of big bureaucracy coming in and saying, okay, little people, here's what you need. So I think that's a good point. We probably don't want it to sound jargony, and I like how you framed that, Commissioner Brott. I missed some of what you said in the first part of your comment. I couldn't hear it, but I like what you said about making it really obvious to HUD, like, hey, here's all the great work that's been done. Here's what we want to do next. And the only thing keeping us from doing it is the money that you have. So give it to us and we'll make this thing happen. Because I think that kind of plug-in is really helpful for a grantor to see, like, I can put money here and something will happen. So we'll look at that again and see if we can be a little bit more precise.
Yeah, I think to synthesize a bit, like to what I was saying earlier, like there were just so many questions. We need to make sure we're answering them. I feel like we did a good job, and obviously do give us the feedback. Like, it's certainly better now than later. On their questions later on about like, how are you going to implement it? We did a pretty thorough job explaining like these plans have been done. These have been put in. I think you make an excellent point of smoothing it earlier, just clarifying some of those details earlier. So I agree, that is part of what makes this unique, particularly for that person.
Yeah, and then just add to all of that, I think when we were designing it, that chart that she was going through, that was like a big circle, is there has been all this great community engagement for Midtown, and why we wanted to, emphasize the community land trust. If like a developer wanted to go that route, we got extra funds to build that capacity, because it has to be like an organization that can run it forever. So we wanted to say, we're listening to the community so they don't have this community engagement fatigue, and then that would feed into the land use rewrite. So they're like, oh, they're actually listening and acting on the stuff we've been telling them. And that's kind of part of that big cycle. Yeah. But I hear what you're saying. Maybe we just need to kind of flesh
Just
out.
clarifying details is really helpful, but I mean, just again, to hear the critique of like, it wasn't coming across that way, particularly when we all know. Like I think that is one thing that makes our application unique.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Thank you.
May I ask one more question? Yes.
So the one thing you did say about the neighborhood stabilization plan, you thought it didn't detail enough as to how to approach that. And I agree with that. I feel like we've been struggling with like how to approach this. Maybe that's why it was more general, but I don't know if Alex or Cody or
I mean, I think
or Florence even to talk about.
Yeah, I think part of the concern we had at one point, but again, I think this is a really important tension, is we didn't want to overpromise certain steps we weren't sure if we could use, particularly with what HUD would let us. But I think that's an important tension of like maybe get a little bit more specific on areas we could do so that it isn't quite as fussy.
Do we have additional information we can add to that? I don't know if it was like, remember we were talking about overlays potentially. I don't know if that makes sense to add kind of ideas that things that have come from community groups. I'm looking at Alex because she was there with me when we had been talking about.
Yeah.
this a minute ago.
Madam Chair, I think at this phase, this stage, I don't want to be too specific. Florence touched on it a little bit, but also just because what if we get into it and we realize that whatever we're specific about isn't actually the way it's going to work the best? And I don't want to have that kind of, I think we just thought at this stage, we know what the general concept is. Those details will, as we get into the actual finding that partner to help with that work, it's going to get a lot more specific.
Commissioner Brott, do you want to follow up on that? You have other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, may I ask one more question?
Please.
Thank you. It's kind of just a larger question of, we focus on Midtown infrastructure, and I'm wondering why we're focusing on Midtown infrastructure and not, say, Tierra Contenta infrastructure. And I'm asking that and then trying to just think in my mind to tie it back to how we describe that to HUD. This is how we have competing demands for infrastructure, and this is how we thought through that process. To me, as a reader, I think that would have been helpful. I was a little surprised to see this infrastructure prioritized over Tierra Contenta infrastructure, which, as I understand, would unlock a lot of affordable housing potential. But you guys know more about that than me, so I'm just interested in your thought process.
Commissioner Brott, that's a great question, and we did think about Tierra Contenta, and we went back and forth between the two. Part of the Tierra Contenta issue is that we need buckets of money, and we weren't sure we could get there with this grant, and we really wanted to pick something that we felt like was a solvable, right, with the amount of money that we thought we might get. And we know what that infrastructure number is for Midtown. So that was part of the thinking, but the bigger piece and the big emphasis when you read the actual grant application, not our response, but what HUD put in there is a lot of focus on providing housing opportunities in a what HUD calls a high opportunity area for people with low incomes. And Midtown is so well situated for that, because there's so many people living nearby that have low incomes, and it just really offers a huge opportunity for folks. Versus Tierra Contenta is greenfield development, so it's gonna be a different kind of, it's just gonna have a slightly different service area out there as well. It's already a fairly well-resourced area. Tierra Contenta, if you look at income maps, has a much higher income than a lot of the surrounding neighborhoods. And so this Midtown, in relationship with Hopewell Man and the other nearby Midtown neighborhoods, there's such a disparity in incomes that we felt like a little bit, because it's so specific. But really the big answer is we just don't have, there's no way they're going to give us enough money to build that entire road. So we didn't want to go for Tierra Contenta and then only get part of the money and then not even be able to do anything with it.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful for me. I think it might, if I can suggest it might just be helpful to write down summary of what she just said, what Alex said, because it helps articulate that you thought through this process of where the money could be best used. I think I would find that useful.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hughes.
I think the proposal needs some eye candy. The drone shot of Midtown does nothing for me, nor do the maps in here. I really would appreciate some photos of Tierra Contenta, of West San Francisco Barrio, or off Baja Fria, traditional areas and new areas that are getting 15 to 20 dwelling units an acre, without going sometimes 2 stories. That's it. And I think that's something that a lot of Santa Feans would like to see, and you can achieve that by both updating land use code and putting money into Midtown. So, but if I was on the judging committee, it's, oh, this is very nice. This is what they must mean by Santa Fe style.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I agree with that. I thought it was just my eyes, but there was some blurriness in some of the maps and just showing, I don't know. I was thinking more photos, but then I don't think they allow for it. Like HUD has this, I'm assuming it's an online application that you cut and paste, but maybe not. How does that work, Alex? Or I don't know who else wanted to explain how that works. Maybe Florence knows better, because I was thinking more.
Well,
photos.
no, it's the key tension we've had, and I think especially one that we've talked about this week is like, from what it seems like, this is the prettier looking version of the application, it's just the whole thing. When we actually submit it, it's a very boring, like attachments for each section, that's why they hear so much about those exhibits. We're still not quite sure on the photos and on the images. That's definitely an area we know we might just need to lose and to be able to describe that tension well. I think it's a great point about if we can have photos, if we can have images, make sure the right ones, so I appreciate it. But, so I would say right now, like as of when I tested it yesterday, it looked like a maybe. But I shared the same concern, I'm sure about it, not formatting well.
They want us to apply using grants.gov. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the greatest interface.
Do they let you upload maps?
As exhibits, we believe.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna be interspersed throughout the application like y'all are seeing it.
You have to reference the exhibit.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
People.
And they don't.
Well, hopefully there'll be a way to highlight and have visuals that you can upload that accentuate the proposal. I don't see, let's see, any other comments, questions? Hands raised, no? The only thing I would just check, make sure there's a section that talks about what displacement, what other counties or communities people go to. It didn't reference Rio Rancho and Bernalillo County. I think that was page, oh, what page was that? I'm trying to remember where it is here. I think it's, oh, it's page 11 of the report. Talks about relocating to counties such as Rio Arriba, San Miguel, but the biggest one is Bernalillo County and Sandoval County. That's where the majority of people are workforce and folks. So I'm not sure why we didn't add that. Was that something that came from another resource? I don't know. Do you know about that? I just wanted to flag that because I thought that was strange. It didn't say Bernalillo or Sandoval counties.
Yeah, we could double check on that. I know from right now, a lot of that data and a lot of that language is coming from an upcoming report. It's a lot of research given to us with some partnerships we have with an ongoing contract. So Cody and I can check to see where they missed that or if there was just a sentence missing or what, because I agree. So I know part of that specific data was looking at the tax forms, but that should still come up for those areas.
Okay. I just thought that we'd check that because the majority of people commuting are coming from Rio Rancho. I think that's it. Any other comments before we move on? I just wanted to applaud staff for all the work that you did to put this together. Just so much rich data. I even wanted to like point out some really like important data points that you all mentioned just to like make the case also for the excise tax. I was like, we need to use that. So there was just some really good information that I hope we can continue using even for potentially other grants and other opportunities for funding. So thank you. Good job, team. Yeah. So let's see, moving on to look at my agenda here. We are on matters from staff.
No matters from staff, Madam Chair.
Nothing, Alex? Okay. All right, so matters from the commission. Did you, we can't hear you, but is there something you wanted to share?
We just wanted to discuss whether those of us who like to support the tax can do so wearing the commissioner's hats.
Okay, I can talk about that. Is there any other questions before I go to matters from the chair?
Yes, Madam Chair, additional question for me. You know, I raised it last time that we were kind of adjourning the meeting, so I didn't really feel like it got the airtime it deserved, is that we all voted to approve the excise tax. We all voted in support, I should say. At the time, none of us were aware that the excise tax would affect apartment sales. Being that apartments are where the lowest income residents in Santa Fe live, to me, I think that's a very pertinent detail in terms of the vote, that we didn't have that information at the time. I don't want to propose that we change the vote or redo the vote, but I would like some sort of conversation, if possible, the city council level, the mayoral level, to address that for the public. It seems very relevant to me. It's been sold to the public as something that's just affecting the homes of people who can afford it, so to speak. So, you know, in quotes, for those who are buying homes of $1 million and more. I don't think the public knows, and I think they deserve to know, that this is affecting the sale of multifamily residences, so apartments across Santa Fe. And if the people buying and selling those are paying a 3% tax, that is very significant, and that will most certainly be passed on to renters. So it's something I just wanted to put on the record. I hope it's discussed at the council level, at the mayoral level. I know it's not something the city attorney had reviewed or presented, but I appreciate you hearing that and putting it in the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know if Alex had any thoughts or to share about that.
Madam Chair, I think just to clarify, any project that's housing the very lowest income folks and has any kind of affordable restriction on it is not subject once it transfers. So it would just apply to the higher end rental. I think, of course, there are market effects, as you know, better than anybody, probably, Commissioner Brott. So it's probably not a huge volume at this point, but it will. I think that's probably a good idea to keep an eye on, to see if we need to mitigate any impacts at some point.
Thank you. Just one more comment, if I may, is that every single apartment building that's built now, you can expect to see it be sold in the next 3 years. That's the development model for each one of these developers. So those that are not for affordable, but say they might not qualify for the lowest income, but it's, firefighters, teachers, people who are, hopefully employed and living in Santa Fe, and they're doing an apartment, they will be the people paying for this tax once those apartments are sold. So, a $1 million threshold, and it sells for $20 million. These are very large apartment complexes. That's an enormous tax bill. The buyer of that apartment complex is going to have to find a way to fund that bill. And the only people funding it are those renting there. It's something that could be changed with a change of 3 words in the legislation. My hope is that the council considers that. Put it on record that I'm voting for this. I hope it passes. I want this affordable housing trust fund to be funded. But I think this is very pertinent, and it's not something I hope to see the renters in Santa Fe paying for.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's very strict rules along the timeline to get stuff on the ballot for ballot measures. We're way beyond that. It's not going to ever come back to the council, even if there's something that, as we look forward to it, that we need to tweak. But there's no way that we could bring this back up because it's already set for the ballot. They have county clerk has very specific timeframes of when they need the language completed, the ballot question. But I think there's ways to kind of look at that in the future. The other thing I would say is that I think it's problematic that large complexes are changing hands often. I think that when you change hands for ownership of apartment complexes, it also creates instability for tenants as it stands right now. So if that's happening already, maybe this prevents people from continuously selling apartment complexes. Because I don't think that that's from what I've understood from community groups that live in apartment complexes, when there's a new owner and there's new people that are actually managing the apartment complexes, there's just been a lot of problems with instability of continuous leadership. So maybe this will prevent that from happening. So I think we're just gonna have to wait and see how some things unfold with some of the nuances that we may not foresee, good and bad. So, but I think that there's ways to mitigate it into the future. This is really just trying to understand or allow for people to have the 3% voting yes or no on the ballot, and it doesn't give any of those details that you're describing. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But thanks for bringing that to our attention, though, because we did talk about it, and it's hard to say the pros and cons of what will happen. So, and I agree with you, there's potential for what you're saying too, for the cost to go on to the renters. Any other comments or matters from commissioners? No. I just wanted to add that you all had expressed interest to sign on to a op-ed as commissioners, community development commissioners. And there is something that we've drafted that essentially talks about, it's a draft right now about what the Community Development Commission does, how does it support the city's funding investments in affordable housing, what is the impact of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and also what is the excise tax in it. So it explains it in each section, not each section, but in this op-ed. So I can send it to you all, that you have no obligation, don't feel obligated to sign on as a commissioner, but if you'd like to sign on for the op-ed, I'll share it with you all, and there's definitely room for some edits, or if you want to make any suggestions. Right now it's somewhat long, but I think we've met the mark in terms of the word count or whatever it is for op-ed. So if you all are amenable to that, I can send it to all of you, and you can decide if you want to sign on or not. Yeah, and that's all I have. Anything else?
Madam Chair, is there an opportunity for the public to speak?
Not on our agenda today, unfortunately. It's not on. We didn't notice it that way.
I thought that was the point of today, was to get more public input.
I think not for Community Development Commission, but for the next meeting that starts right now that Alex and I have to jump to is the quality of life. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, Kim, the quality of life has an actual section on the agenda for comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be able to tune into that. If I may, thank you. If I may, just real quickly, my column on Sunday is going to be about the new FHFA rules that will allow financing for ADUs. And this is a significant phenomenon, and it actually speaks to neighborhood stabilization to the extent that you can actually reference this in your grant application, that you're aware of this and that you understand that it actually can enhance neighborhood stabilization. I think it's a valuable thing for you to think about, and for your staff, Alex, to take a look at this new FHFA rules for financing ADUs. Real big deal. It's a big deal. So thank you, Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Kim, for the insight. If there's anything else, Kim, you can certainly write us an email and staff, and so we can make sure to get those incorporated or considered as well.
Will do. Alex is on my cell phone, so I got it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think we are done. Our next meeting is on Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, and we are adjourned at 5:01. Have a great day, everybody.